All right, welcome back. This is going to be Breakout 11. This will be our last official lab. It'll be in 3 parts. I'll be doing 3 different videos as part of Breakout 11. You'll still have one submission at the end, and then I'll probably do some videos, add some videos to the YouTube site to add some last features to the game that won't be part of the labs, but you could follow along with those later to finish up your game if you choose. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new project as a breakout, and I probably did not save breakout 10 as my template, so this will be breakout 11 in my document repos. And you're going to see I'm going to be doing this in both Windows and Linux during this so that you can see adding new files to the project. We haven't done that in a while. So I don't care about that. Please go away. And then let's, I'll pin this for right now. And let's see, here's our header files and our source files. And if I look here, this is probably breakout, lab 9. So what I need to do is just real quick go out here to breakout 10, copy these 2 files, and come back into repos to breakout 11 and paste them and replace, and it'll just automatically update. So now I have the current code. Let me do a build. All right, and we should be at that point where we have our bricks and we can break them with the ball, and we should be good to go. Okay, so let's get started. What we are going to do is we're going to come here to our project. I'm going to select the project, right click, and I'm going to say add a new item. And what we're doing here is we're going to start doing class objects. It's not going to be very much object oriented, just implementing some user defined classes. So this will be our block.h for our header file. And once that's up, I'm going to come here to my breakout, and I'm going to copy this header block. And let me go ahead and edit this to 11 first. And copy that. And in our breakout CPP, I'm going to go ahead and edit that to 11. And then I'm going to come here to the block.h that I just added, and this will be block.h, and this will be the declaration of a block class object. All right. Now, as a new header file, we need a header guard. So I'm going to do a pound if not def block h. Then we need to define block h, and we need an end if for block h. All right, and just to get started with this, we are going to be implementing a class. So we use the class keyword, and its name is going to be block. We use capital since it's acting like a data type, and then it needs curly braces for the definition of the body. All right, and then our class objects have both a public and a private interface. And so we'll be putting private methods into our private section, and our private properties in our private section, and public methods in the public section. So let's go ahead and see what we're going to do, and then I will switch over to Linux and show how I would do it there. So I'm going to start in our breakout header file, and we're going to come down and find the block structure, and we're going to be replacing this. So I'm just going to copy these properties here inside the block structure, and I'm going to place them here in the private section, in the private interface of our new class. Now notice it doesn't recognize FGCUL, so I need to include that. Now I can do it here inside the header guard, It really doesn't matter since we know it has the FGCUGLH file has its own header guard, so I don't have to include it inside my header guard here, but it works good if I do it. All right, so now it recognizes that. Now we're not going to initialize anything here. We're just going to declare our properties. All right, so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go ahead and do a couple methods here. We're going to do our constructors, which are what get called when we create a new class object, and we're going to start with our default constructor, which is just going to be the name of the class with no parameters passed to it. And we're just doing the function declarations here in the header file. And then we're going to have a property constructor where we're going to pass in an X, and I'm going to name some of these the same and some of them different, with height and a FGCUGL color, and we'll call it color. And here we can actually set it as a default value. So let's do equals FGCUGL, and let's do white as a blank. And the reason why is for the most part, when we're doing a constructor, we're trying to set up a kind of a default blank object, and so we would consider maybe white to be that default color. All right, so I'm going to leave this here. This is our new header file. We see it in our project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to Linux real quick and just show again how we would add a new file to a project in C-Line. So I'll be right back with that. All right, so just real quickly here in Linux, if you're running this on Mac or running the Linux VM on Windows, I'm going to start a new project in C-Line, and I'm going to call it Breakout 11. All right, once it's open, I'm going to come out here and go to my Breakout 10. And I'm actually going to come here and just make sure I've got the right files. So my home repos, breakout 11, I'm going to paste those files here. And then in here, I'm going to actually delete this main CPP file. Delete it anyway, and then I'm going to come up here to repos to my CMake temp file and copy all this. I'm going to do Control A, Control C, and close that. And then in my make file, I got to replace this. Oops. All right, and then reload the changes. All right, you're going to see this line 14. This is where we add new files, but you're going to see that it's going to do it for us. So when I come back here now, we should have we have our FGCU GLCPP file, and then in the project we have our breakout H and breakout CPP file. So all right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to come here to the project, and we're going to add a new I need to do it here on this folder. We're going to add a new header file. All right, and this will be block.h, type is header. Notice this checkbox here for line 14 to add this file to the definition of this source's environment variable here. And you can kind of see it's got it highlighted here. So when we say OK, we get our new header file. Notice it's already put a header guard on it. And when we look back at our CMake, we'll see block.h was added here. All right, so in here we would just put the same things that we have in the other file. All right, so we have our file header and our header guard, and then we have our class definition with our public interface with our constructors and our private interface with our constructors, and we've added our block.h. All right, so I'll come back to this when we add the main CPP file in just a couple minutes. All right, so to finish off our header file, we just need to add some more methods to our class. So right now we have our constructors. These are for initializing a new block. And then for our private properties, we need some public accessor methods. And in here we'll need getters and setters. And so what we have to do is we have to define some read and some update methods to be able to allow any code that has an instance of a block to get to these properties. So for the getters, we're returning the property, so whatever the type of the variable is becomes the type of that method. So in this case, for our X position, we need a get method, and we can change the names here to make things seem more spelled out or friendlier to work with or anything like that. So here we'll do an get X coordinate. And remember, we're just doing the function declarations here. We'll implement the function definitions in the CPP file. So this will be get Y coordinate, and then get width, and get height, and get, and then here FGCU GL, color, get color. All right, so I have a getter for each of the private properties so I can read them. And now to be able to update them, I need setters. So I would do a, now setters don't return anything typically, so they're void. And we'd have a set X coordinate. And here I need to pass a value to this method to update the X position property. So I need the data type of the property, and then I typically just use the word value for that parameter. And watch what I'm going to just copy that and call that set Y coordinate. And this is why I just reuse that parameter name value. And then this will be set width and set height. And then set color, except for color doesn't take an int value, it takes an FGCU GL color, so FGCU GL color. But we can still call it value. All right, so that'll be my accessor methods, my setters and getters, and I'm going to define the rest of the properties or methods real quick, and then we can implement the source code file. So if you're working in Linux, you should be able to keep up right now. And then so we're going to have, right now we have an X coordinate, a Y coordinate, a width, and a height. So sometimes if we want to know like where's the right side of a block, we have to look at the X position plus its width. Or if the left is just the X position. So what we want to do is we're going to implement some fake property methods to represent the left and the right and the top and the bottom of our block object as just kind of a convenience. So these are going to be member methods. And the rest of our methods will actually be member methods. But we're going to have a method, it's going to return an integer, so it'll be an int, and we're just going to call it top. And it's going to act like we have a top property. And then we'll have another one for bottom, and then another one for left, and then another one for right. All right, and we'll see how we're going to implement those in just a couple minutes. And then we want to know right now in breakout, we've been, if I scroll down to, I believe, an update, that's create bricks, process input, update. We've been looking at to determine if a block is broken, we've been looking at the Y position to see, is the Y position 0 or not 0? Well, what we want is a convenience method for that. So we're gonna have a Boolean method, and we'll just call it is empty. And this will return true if this block is empty. In other words, if it was created with the default constructor and everything is zeroed out in it. So we'll see how we're going to implement that. And then we're going to want to be able to draw a block. So this drawing is typically void. It typically doesn't return anything. So we'll have our draw method. And since these blocks aren't moving, these are like the walls. They don't need the lag and all that. So we'll see how we're going to implement the moving blocks. And then if we look at it though, when we do get to the bricks, we needed where's our render method? So our bricks, we needed this ability to draw a bordered block. So we're going to create a method for that in our block. We'll just call it draw with border. All right, and that's going to be now our draw with border. It won't need to know anything about the block. In other words, when we look here, we had to pass in the block and the border color and the border size. So we're not going to need to know about the block because we're going to be a block. We're going to have all the properties of a block, but we are going to want to know about the border color and the border size, and we can actually default these here to GL black and a border size of 1 pixel. All right, and remember, we only do the defaults in the definition. All right, so in the declaration, sorry. All right, so this is our header file now for a block object. We have our constructors, we have our accessors, our getters and setters, and then we have our member methods. All right, so, and then we have, of course, our private properties. All right, so let's go ahead and start here with a block CPP file to implement the block, to do all the function definitions. So I'll start it here and then I'll switch over to Linux real quick and catch this up. So over here in my project in Visual Studio, I'm going to right click and I'm going to do add a new item, and I'm going to do a C++ file, and I'm going to call this block.cpp. All right, and I see it get added down here, and I come over to my block header, and I'm going to copy this file header. I'm going to put that in block CPP and change this to CPP and change this to implementation of a block class object. All right, and then the first thing I need to do is include block.h. All right, and let me stop real quick and just refresh how we're going to do that in Linux, and then I'll come back and finish this up here. All right, we're back over here in Linux. We've got our header file set up for our block. We want to come over here to our project folder. I'm going to right click and do a new, and here I'm going to do a C++ source code file, and I'm going to call it block.cpp. And make sure this is checked so that it's updating on line 14 the source files environment variable. I'm going to click OK. Here I get my block CPP file. If I look in my CMake, I've got block CPP and block H have now been added there. All right. If they weren't added through that checkbox, I could just type them in here. That's the only change I need to make though. So now when I come over here, I can come back here, and like I did before, I can copy this into my block CPP and call this block.cpp, and then do my include for my block.h. Oops. All right, and I'm ready to go here. So what I'm going to do, oh, sorry, this should be implementation. All right, so I'm going to switch back over to Visual Studio real quick and finish this up. All right, we're back here in Visual Studio on Windows. The rest of this should be the same. We're going to come back here to our header, or our block header file, and we're going to copy all of the methods in the public interface. Just copy all the methods and come back over to the implementation file and paste those. And then, because notice in the header file, notice all of this is defined inside of the body of the class. When we go to the implementation file, we don't have that. So we need to tell the compiler that all of these belong to a block class object. So we do that by just putting the name of the class as a namespace in front of the name of all the methods, which we know for the constructors is a little weird because there's no return data type for a constructor. And we just do this, and these are red right now. I'll show here in a minute. They're red because they don't want the semicolon there. They want the body because we're doing the definitions now. All right, so I'll fix those up later. All right, so remember, we don't put it in front of the data type. We do it in front of the method name. So I'm going to use that Alt, Shift, and down arrow to highlight these, and then I can paste all of those at one time. And then I'm going to fix up the semicolons here in a second. I'm going to do that there. And then likewise here, I can do that Alt, Shift, and select all of those and paste. And then same thing here, Alt, Shift, and down arrow, and paste. And this should work the same in C-line as well. And then I can just paste there. And then I just have these two. All right, and so now I've got my namespace in front of all the methods. And now I need to change all these semicolons to the curly braces. So I'm just going to do a Control H, and I'm going to say, if you see a semicolon, make it open and close curly braces in the current document, and do. All right, there we go. Now a lot of this red should go away. All right, so we need to start implementing these. For some of these, we're going to need comment blocks. So like this is our default constructor initialize empty block. All right, so to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to come back over here to the block header file and come down here and copy all of the properties. Come back here, and I'm going to paste them right here. Now, I'm not redefining these, so I want to get rid of the data type. So I'm going to hold that down, that Alt Shift, and now I'm going down and then right, and then I can hit delete. And then same thing here, I want to get rid of that color. And so for each of these, I just need to set them. And these are integers, so I'm just going to set them to 0. Oops, equals 0, equals 0, and this will equal our FGCUGL white. All right, and that'll be our blank object. Okay, we're just initializing a blank, an empty block. Okay, so notice I can get to the private properties directly because I'm inside of a method that has the block class namespace. If I were to take that namespace off, I wouldn't be able to see the properties. So that's what the namespace does for us. All right, so similar to this, oh, and I'm going to do something here real quick. I'm going to put a, could have just copied the one from up there. I'm going to put a divider here because that's going to help make things stand out a little bit here. Accessors and member methods. All right. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to bring this guy down and that, and then I'm going to copy these. Actually, I'm going to copy this first, paste it above it, and then I'm going to, this is going to be my properties constructor, and initialize to parameter values. All right, and then now I'm going to copy this. Now one thing you'll see is I changed some of the names. So we know we're setting the block's X position to this parameter X and the Y position to this parameter Y. But what happens when I get here and I'm setting width to width? Am I trying to set this parameter to itself, or the block's width to itself, or the block's width to this? So I need a way to say that this width is the block's width and this width obviously then is the parameter. So I can do that and make that stand out by using the hidden this pointer. And this is our pointer logic. We're not really going to deal with pointers this semester, but typically we've seen dot notation, but when we have pointers we use this minus sign greater than, or our pointer notation. So this will tell the compiler that the width here is the width for the block class object, and then this one is the width from the parameter. So same thing here, do this. Height is going to equal the height parameter, oops, and then this color is going to equal whatever color is passed in. All right, so there's our constructors. As we get down to these getters, now here we're not going to use function header comment blocks, and we're going to inline these functions instead of doing them down like this, and only because these are very standard. So for each one of these I want to return one of these properties. So for the get x coordinate, I'm returning the x position as an integer. So all I need to do is in the body do a return x position semicolon. All right, and I'm going to do that for the other ones. Return y position semicolon, and then return width semicolon, return height, and then return color. And so those are all my getters. My setters don't return anything. Notice they're all void, but I passed in a value, so I want to set the local value, the local property, to the value parameter. So for instance here I set x position equal to value, and then here I'm going to set y position equal to value, and for each one of these it's the value in its parameter list. So width equals value, and height equals value, and then color equals value. All right, now when we get down to these methods are like the getters, only they're for these fictitious top, bottom, left, right properties, but we have to implement them as methods. So here for the top of our block is at its y position plus its height. So we need to return that y position plus height. All right, for the bottom would just be at its y position. All right, the left would be at its X position, and the right would be at its X position plus its width. All right, so you can see how that's just going to save me having to do these formulas, and it'll be more readable later on, especially in the collision detection. Now, is empty, once again, we were looking at the Y position, but let's say later on we implement this block in another game where a block could be at the bottom of the screen. That wouldn't work for us, but we could say that a block that doesn't have any height or width, in other words, its height and width have been initialized to zeros, that is definitely not, that is definitely an empty block. So here we can do a return, and we're going to do the width plus the height. If those two added together equals 0, all right, so notice we're using the double equal or the equality check. So we're saying, is width plus height equal to 0? So if there's no width or height value, then this thing is obviously empty. All right, so this should return a Boolean true or false. And we need a header block on this one. Return true if block is empty, width plus height is 0. All right, and we'll keep this one simple. All right, now our draw method. Okay, so this will be our, if we go to breakout and we come down here to render, when we draw a wall, we draw it as a quad. And we're going to call this is going to be, I'm going to copy this comment block above render and come back to block CPP, and I'm going to put that here. And I need to finish that comment block. And I'm going to say that this is draw a block object on the OpenGL window. Okay, so so if we look back at breakout, we do that by drawing a quad for things like the wall. So we need to do one of these FGCUGL draw a quad. So FGCUGL draw quad. All right, so here's what it needs. It needs a float X, Y, width, height, and a color. So we have all those. We have an X position, a Y position, a width, a height, and a color. So there we go. Now we can draw a block. Now this draw with border, if we look back at breakout, now that drew 2 quads. All right, so I'm going to copy this. I'll put that in our block here. Now notice we don't need to pass a block as a parameter because we are a block. But we are still passing the border color and border size. All right, so now to implement that, if we come back here to our breakout, we drew 2 quads. So I'm going to copy these for now and paste those in here. All right, now this is good except for we don't need the block here because we are a block. We have an X position and a Y position, so we can just get rid of these. All right, now this is good. Now here we have the Same thing, except for, and actually, no, I was going to do this slightly different. Okay, so we can reuse this draw method that already knows how to draw a block as a quad. We just need to create some new blocks with these properties. So we're going to do that. We're going to create a temporary block. So we're going to do a background. Let's do a block and call it background. And we're going to make it a block. But we're going to call, notice we have multiple choices here of blocks that we can call, right? So this is the one that we want. And so what we're saying here is we want this constructor here where we can pass in an X, Y, width, height, and a color. And so we can really just get rid of this and bring this up, and that becomes a call to create a background block, a variable name background of type block, by calling the block constructor, passing this instance of the blocks X, Y, width, height, and the border color. All right, now we need an inner block, or we'll call it the foreground. And it'll be kind of the same thing, or actually we can copy this instead. And it's going to be a block, and we'll paste that. And then I'm going to get rid of this. Actually, I should have had that up here. All right, so once again, we don't need these blocks because we are a block. But everything else stays the same. All right. So now we have our background block and a foreground block, and now we just need to draw them. So we can do, and we can do each one of them like this. We could do background dot draw, and we're just going to call its draw method. Oops. And then I'm just going to copy this. Foreground dot draw. Oop. There we go. And there's our draw methods. All right, so we've implemented all of our methods now in our CPP file. We've got our default constructor that creates an empty block. We have our block, our property constructor where we can pass in property values. We have our getters for our accessors and our setters, and we have our helper, our member methods here. We have these dimension methods, our isEmpty, and we see whenever we have these Boolean type functions, we typically start the function name with a verb, like is or has. I think they're called adverbs, but yeah, a verb like isEmpty, and then our draw method and our draw with border. All right, so let's see how we're going to implement these. We're going to start by going to breakout H, and this block structure, we're going to delete it. So highlight the block structure, only the block structure, and delete it, and hit save. And when we go to, notice our walls already is upset because, hey, it had 4 blocks, top, bottom, left, and right. So we can fix that. We can come up here, and here we're including FGCUL.H. Let's include our new block.H. This is our block object. All right, and now when we scroll back down, it should be happy again. All right, so our walls are happy again. They're all blocks, but now they're block class objects, not block structures. Now when we go to breakout CPP, now we got a bunch of red. Now notice it includes breakout.h, and breakout.h includes block.h. So we don't need to include block.h here. All right. Now notice here's a block called, in our bricks array, and here's block. And it's perfectly fine. It's finding the definition for that. All right, but as we start going down, we're going to start seeing some errors. Here we've got some errors showing up in our create bricks method, and we are no longer populating a structure. Here we've got this list style structure, and so we can't use that. We need to convert this to a constructor of some sort. All right, so notice we broke this up. We populated some part of the structure, and then we populated the color. And so we need to do this a little bit differently. What we want to do is our bricks array is already row times column block object memory areas. And so we want to instantiate them using a constructor. And when we do that, it really gets created in a temporary space. So when we do this, this would call the default constructor and creates a temporary block object in memory. And then this equal sign would say copy all of those properties into the properties in the bricks array memory area at row column. All right, so what we want to do is we want to populate with that with all of these things. So I'm going to copy these. All right, and if we were to do this, we'd be calling the property constructor without the color, which would default it to white. So now all we need to know is what is the color. So let's just change the way we're doing this, and instead of creating this block up here, let's create an FGCUGL color variable, block color, and we'll just leave it empty here, and then we'll come down here, and instead of setting block.color, we'll set the block color variable to the correct color. And now we can come here and we can actually add that to the constructor, and now we've populated all the properties of the constructor. All right, so let's go down here and see what we need to handle. We're in our update, we're passing our brick, which is an array of blocks, and our walls, which is 4 blocks. All right, when we get down here into our collision checking, notice here we were testing to see if the Y position had a value. Well, all we want to do now is change that to is empty as a call to a function. So we need the parameter list, but we now want to know if not bricks row column is empty. Then we can do collision checking. All right, so you can see how if you name it well, it kind of reads like an English sentence. If not bricks at row column is empty, then do this. All right, now we get down here. Here we were trying to set, we have a collision, we want to set the block at bricks row column to 0. Well, really we just want to make it empty. So what we want to do is call the default constructor and say reinitialize the block at row column to be an empty block by calling the default constructor, which will, in our CPP file, our default constructor will set everything to 0 and the color to white. So that's what we're doing here. All right, so now we just come down a little bit, and okay, so now we're in render, and here, once again, we were testing, we don't want to draw if it's empty, so if not, bricks at row column dot is empty, and we need the parameter list, even though there's no parameters. And then here, instead of calling draw border block, we can actually say for the block at bricks row column, we want to draw with border. And we didn't really need to specify the color or the border size because we can use the defaults. Okay, and then our last, well, not our last thing, but here in our walls, instead of calling draw a quad, each of these, like walls.top, is a block. So in other words, we can do walls.top.draw. And then we can just get rid of these and then copy this guy. We'll need a bottom, left, and right. And come back here and do bottom, left, and right. All right, so we're just calling the new draw method of the block object. And then come down here. Okay, so now draw border block, we don't need this. We don't need this method at all. We've moved it into the block class object. So we just delete it from breakout CPP. Now if I delete it here, I need to go back up to the prototypes at the top and get rid of it there. All right, now we'll be getting rid of collision check a little later on when we implement the ball as a class. So I'm going to scroll back down to where we see more red. Okay, so here, notice we were accessing the X position, right, to be the left property, or the X position plus width to be the right of the rectangle. So now we can use those new methods. So I'm just going to delete that and do dot, and this would be left. And remember, it's a function call, so we need the parameter list. And so this would be dot left. And then this would be, I'm going to select all this, and this would be right, so dot right. And then this would be dot right. Oops, right. All right, you can see where that kind of spelled things out a little bit better. So this would be below, so this would be bottom, dot bottom. And then this would be top, dot top, and block, dot top. All right, I don't see any more red. All right, let's see if this will build. Oh, what have we done? Oh, I know. I do this all the time. So anytime you see that redefinition in the CPP file, when we put down the methods, we can't have any default values. The default values are only in the declaration, which we put in the header file. So that's one in the block property constructor, and then it'll also be down here where we declared the draw with border. We can't have these default values in the definition. We have them in the declaration in the header file. We look at the header file, we've got the default here for the constructor and for the draw with border. All right, and now we got a successful build, and if we run, we should get, everything should be working the same. All right, so that's the first part of the lab. Come back for the next part where we'll implement the paddle. We'll actually implement our paddle finally. Okay, see you shortly.